Welcome to the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast with best-selling author Fawn Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Come here weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network.
Hi, I'm Fawn Germer.
And I'm Michelle Brigman.
And this is the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast. Today we're here with China Widener, who I met several years ago as a speaker. And I've got to tell you, when I saw her as a person in the audience, I was blown away by the force of her presence. This is someone who has moved me and inspired me and who I knew instantly I wanted to be friends with. So I'm so pleased to share her with you because she's so wise and she's got it figured out. Boy, this woman works hard. So China, you've got some constraints about what you can say about what you do. So I'm going to let you handle the introduction for yourself.
Thanks, Fawn. So China Widener, the best way I'll contextually sort of introduce myself is to say, think of it as I spend lots of my time these days in one of the larger consulting firms in the nation and really serve a client base that is moving, challenging, and changing the way we live every day. And that's frankly what gets me up in the morning is that kind of impact, that kind of engagement, that kind of work, if you will.
And you have a very high profile, significant position there. But your background is law.
It is. And so the funny thing about it is I came to where I am through I would say to you, not a path less traveled. I'm not even sure it was a path ever traveled. So this is actually my third career. My first career was I practiced law for about 10 years. I then ran really large government entities and then came to sort of this space and place in the consulting universe. And none of it was by design necessarily, but it was about being open, available, and listening for opportunities as things evolved over time. And so it was more a function of what's the work I like to do versus what's the role, position, or company I want to do it with. And that's really what's driven my career all these years.
You have not been afraid to transition, change, and dive into risk. But you had some lessons in fortitude and some good role models. And just tell us a little about who you are and what your background is.
So that's the nurture, nature, and proxy is the way I typically describe it to people. There's the nurture part, right? There's the nature part, rather, about who we're born as. So I'm number 7 in a list of 8. My parents were interesting and amazing people who I've long said, if education had been an opportunity for them at their point in life, it might look very different. But they didn't have that. What they had was a lot of motherwit, a lot of street smarts, and a lot of grit. And so when you're number 7, there are a lot of things in life that you learn very early. I'm born on a team. When I showed up, they were already present. They were already accounted for. Everybody had their roles in their position in space. So I had to carve out my own. Cute lasts until you're about 3, and after that, nobody cares. And so you're forced to understand the difference between power and influence early. It's a lot of what is anchored in who I am by virtue of that birth order. The nurture part of that's about how you grow. My mother, God love her, and may she rest in peace, but there are 8 of us. My mother had an 8th grade education, but at 50, she went and got her GED. At 53, she decided to go get an associate's degree. And so what she represented and what she always said to us, which was, just because you are born here doesn't mean you are of here. And that's a function of what you choose to do in your life. So while we grew up in really the inner city, what we always understood was the options and choices were about whether we were willing to go out, engage, talk to, do the work, if you will, and not other people's work, just our best work. And so those messages, right, around sort of recognizing that you have to meet the world head on, in her words, head up, shoulders back, chest out, and then what happens will happen. And so that part of the nurturing of me is also a lot of, to your point, around the notion of I'm always willing to take on the next thing. It's because those were my messages, right? My parents said, why not you? Why not that? Why not that opportunity? And so I get they won't all turn out, but I also get that more of them will, the more I engage. And then there's proxy. Proxy is about what you choose in life. That's the adultness, right? That's the leaving the family nest and saying, who do I want to be? Who do I want to be with? Who do I want to be around? What do I want my friend circle, my professional circles all to look like? And how am I going to make those choices? That's the proxy part of who we are. And in my world, it is a rich fabric, I have to say, because it's again, a function of substantively, who are you? What do you want? Who am I? What do I want? And how do those things mesh? It's in fact, if you think about how we met, it was a bit of that, right? It was, oh, I'm fascinated by what you're saying. You have interest in what I'm saying. Let's have a conversation about that. On the surface, we might not look like we would become friends, but if you just scratch a little bit, what you find is you get some really interesting relationships over time that are unexpected and frankly jewels throughout the course of your life.
So I'm really curious more about your parents, and I love the lessons they gave you. Then tell me a little about them. What gave them this ability to push their kids into dreaming more and having more, and then how they reacted, and then how the other kids did?
So it's interesting in a lot of ways. The eight of us have all achieved in our own right? So my brothers all have 30 plus year military careers, ascending to their highest level in their worlds and what they could do as non-commissioned officers. My sisters all have it's an entrepreneurial spirit that we all have. So and it's because my father's words were, listen, you can't make enough money working for anybody else when you have 8 children and no education. So we got to do this for ourselves. And so they were always in business for themselves, from record stores to gas stations to bars. And all of those were very people-oriented businesses, if you think about it, right? And so you need to draw people into you. And while they didn't necessarily have the MBA knowledge or skill about what it takes to run a business, what they absolutely knew, and I think what they passed on to all of us, is the fact that people, no matter what walk of life, no matter from where they hail or what they do, ultimately are looking for the same thing. They're looking to belong, they're looking to be engaged, they're looking to be seen. And if you see them and engage them, if you give them a sense of this is a place where they can be, they will come to you. And so our gas station didn't just sell gas, it also became a bit of a gathering place. The bar didn't just sell alcohol. There were people who were regulars in a way that sometimes I'm not sure exactly how much drinking was really happening. There was a point at which the kids all had to leave. But there was also just a different kind of community in those places. And the same thing was true with the record store. So what it told us, which was you can engage anyone. What they did, which was as a child, I abhorred it, to be perfectly honest. As an adult, I'm so grateful every day for what they did, which was, in many instances, it didn't matter what it was. You could be in a store, returning an item, and my parents would say, you go do that. You go have that conversation. And we would say things like, but that's a fill in the blank adult, that's a manager, and they would say, and everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time. So you need to go ask your question. I'm not going to speak for you, or you will never learn to speak for yourself. And while as a child, and they started this very early and it was very consistent, it was a little daunting, to be sure. But ultimately, what you learn is if you just talk to people, regardless of where they are in the world or what you need from them, you have a right to the exchange. And I think underneath it, it's that notion that you have a right to ask, you have a right to request, you have a right to require, right? Is something that I think a lot of times people don't learn early enough. And so the consequence is you accept what's given to you as opposed to requiring more from yourself, from other people. And that's the thing at its core that I think was brilliant. And whether it was brilliant by luck or design, I don't know. But in the long run, for all 8 of us, it has served us incredibly well.
Gosh, Michelle, don't you know so many women who never get that lesson at all?
No, I know. And I'm sitting here having the moment of realizing exactly how you described her as just commanding the room, because you have been dropping so much wisdom on us right now. I'm diligently taking notes, but I kind of like this theme we're going down of sort of this linear progression. And I want to ask, you mentioned earlier, when you see someone being seen, people want to be seen. So who saw you in college? Who had an influence on you there?
Yeah, so I had two fascinating and polar opposite experiences in college, both of which have shaped me in very different ways, but ultimately in extremely positive ways. So the first experience really was, I think I was sophomore year, I decided I was going to be, a leader in our dorm. And so there was a leadership program. And so the program, we went through our training and they were having this dinner event afterwards, right? And so, as these things go, well, like we're all 19, right? So we go, oh, you're going to change clothes? I'm not changing clothes. Nobody's changing clothes. Great. We're going to all go like we are. Somewhere there was a decision shift. I didn't get the memo. So I show up at this thing and I'm still in the shorts and t-shirt that we were in all day. And at that point, I had a choice to make. I could either walk back down the hill, change clothes and come back, or just go as I was. So what I will also tell you is in those days, I weighed about 260. I wasn't walking back down the hill. Like I just wasn't. And so I go ahead and go in. I'm standing at the buffet line. A gentleman comes up behind me. In those days, I would probably have said to you, old guy, but I realized today he was probably like 42. And he says to me, so you're either incredibly confident or incredibly confused. And I turned around and looked at him and I said, tell me why it matters. And he said, okay, then I'm going to go with confident. I said, okay, who are you? And he goes, oh, I'm nobody. I'm just I'm a 50-year-old white guy who put on a suit to come get a meal. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, you know how this works. If you put on a suit and you're, a gray-haired white guy and you show up, people will feed you and they will just accept you. And I thought, you're nuts. And so I didn't think any more about it. There was a little more exchange. I get my plate, go in, sit down. Well, somewhere through the course of the dinner service, he winds up at the table where I am. Now I'm thinking, now, mind you, folks, this is like, was it 1985? So you don't think stalker and you don't think creepy at this point. You just think you're just strange. But our dorm leader was sitting there and they were having a conversation. And I basically said, who is he? And he said, I'm nobody. And she didn't answer. And so all night long, this went on. He said, I'm nobody, it doesn't matter. But he did say something interesting, which is he said, I'm somebody who nobody ever calls just to see how I'm doing. They only call to ask for something. So I make a mental note. And now fast forward, I'm determined to figure out who this man is, because that's who I am as a human. And so I do figure out who he is. It turns out he was the senior VP of student affairs. So I go to his office. And I say to his administrative assistant, I don't want you to disrupt him or disturb him. I just want you to give him a message, which is, I just stopped by to see how he was doing. And I was going to leave. And she said, no, I really need you to wait. He comes out. I don't know what he was doing. He comes out and he says, oh, so confident and smart. I got it. From that day forward, he and I had a relationship. And what I didn't know at the time is that this is how he identified students all the time that he was going to pour something into. And in my case, what it became was an opportunity to be exposed to things I wouldn't otherwise have been exposed to be in rooms I wouldn't otherwise have been in, and to learn that it's okay to be the person in the room without all the answers, that it's okay to be the person in the room who's actually doing some absorbing, that it's okay to be the person in the room who's going to ask a good question and not necessarily have any kind of answer for the people around the table. And so he did that. I would get 2 tickets to events or things or invites that I didn't know sometimes what they were or even why I was going. He was smart enough to know that a 20-year-old and 19-year-old is probably going to take a friend if she's going to go, as opposed to going alone. And the thing is, he never asked if I went. Sometimes I would bump into him at these events, and sometimes I never saw him. he never would ask me if I went. But our conversations, because we would meet on a, I don't know, every 6 to 8 week basis, were always centered around, I realized in hindsight, something that I took from those events, from those activities, those sessions. It was fascinating because it allowed me today to be comfortable not being the smartest person in the room, being comfortable. I'm not the most experienced person sitting at this table, but that's okay.
What an incredible story. And it makes me think of, you hear stats that talk about women in business are mentor rich, champion poor. And what I hear you describe is this man was a champion for you. And I think, how did that, and I'd love just to get you to speak on that a little bit to our audience about creating champions and building those relationships.
Yeah, and you're right. He was a champion, and he did that in a way that didn't require me to be a mini me. I didn't have to be like him. I could be me in that process. And the distinction is mentors share their experiences with you so that you can glean, pick or choose, think about how you might want to apply to the circumstance you're in. But champions facilitate an opportunity. And sometimes that opportunity is to facilitate an actual role, right? A very specific thing that you're trying to actually acquire. But it can also be championing your growth through exposure, right? Through experience that you actually acquire, not that you hear secondhand. And that's really important and very different. I was applying to law school and he said to me, do you think it's more important to get another good grade or to figure out how business works? Champions push you to think deeper than you would have otherwise based on your skill or ability in the moment. They ask you harder questions, and then depending on your answer and your own frame, facilitate you in getting the experience, the knowledge, the exposure, the relationship that you actually need to have to achieve your goal. And you have to identify the difference, and nobody sits in one bucket or the other the whole time. Right? There are people who mentor you who might champion you on a particular issue. There are people who will champion you and might mentor you on a particular issue. So it is fluid and porous in terms of the relationship. But if you're asking people to do something for you and they choose to do that, they are championing you. And that comes with some exchange of responsibility, right? And ultimately. And so I know the difference when it's happening, because with champions, what I would say, at least my own personal philosophy is, when I show up, it's a lot like with my parents. You are representing me out there. So it's not just about what you choose. It's also about how what you choose reflects on me. And so I'm also cognizant of that, because a champion could place their bets on somebody other than you, right? It's their choice. It's their prerogative. So if you've chosen to pour that into me, then I want to make sure that what I'm doing is going to benefit both of us, because people are going to assess your champion's judgment by virtue of what you've done, right? If your champion says, China should have this shot and China does a really good job, then two things happen. I got my opportunity, and that person got some chits on their own as well about their judgment, their ability to spot talent, their ability to grow talent. So there's something in it for both the champion and the person being championed, for sure. But we don't always ask for what we want or need. And two, we don't always follow up even when the offer is there, because sometimes the offer is more subtle than we think it is.
Well, can you hit on that just a bit more? Because I think this is because I think this is such a challenge for women as they hear you should ask for it, but like some practical tips on asking and what that feels and looks like.
So I have a 3-pronged way that I try to think about this and talk about this. And one of which is, one, you got to know what you want, right? You have to start by thinking through what's your own goal. Because I can't help you if you don't know what you're asking for, right? So first things first, which is have some real clarity about what your own goal or outcome is, so that you can articulate it clearly enough to the person that you're hoping to have, some sponsorship or champion behavior from. So once you're clear about what it is, you then have to be clear about whether this person is actually the person who can help you. A lot of times the no isn't because somebody's unwilling. It's because you're asking the wrong person for the wrong thing. A champion has to have chits in position and power in the space and place where you need the help. So you don't go to a podiatrist if you have a heart problem. It's no different, right? In the work world, you go to the right people who are sitting in the right space and place for the right help. And so one, you got to know what you want. Two, you have to make sure you're about to ask the right person. And then you have to be sure about the relationship. And so it's like anything else in the world. The first time I meet you, I can't really ask you for a kidney, right? That comes over time because we've built something together, a relationship, a connection. You know a bit about me, I know a bit about you. And the same thing is true, I think, in championing situations. You have to have some relationship, whether that is by virtue of someone else's referral into that relationship. So you start at step 5 instead of step 1, or if you're starting at step 1, right, the ask is commensurate with the relationship. And so you might have to build to that ask. But if you're there, if the relationship's intact, you know what it is that you want, then it really is just a matter of saying, and it's not so much about saying, so Sally, can you do this for me? It's more about saying, Sally, here's my goal. And I'd be super interested in any direction or support you could provide, because here's what I'm doing, right? So here's my buy-in, here's my ante of what I'm doing to get there. But I think or believe that you might be able to help based on your own set of experiences. And then you've opened the door, and they will give you as much as they are, capable of, interested in, based on the relationship. But then you got to circle back after they've done it and let people know how it turned out, right? Let them know you achieved it, you received it, you have completed it, like whatever the state of grace is, but you follow up. Because the reality is, here's the thing, good champions really know that they're seed planting. And as they climb their own version of their ladder, they've left seeds everywhere they've gone. Those seeds are a benefit to them later, because the further up a ladder you go, the broader the positions become, the more important it is for you to have seeds in lots of places. And so there really is an equal benefit to both parties. But you have to manage it. And women don't always take the time to actively manage the relationship.
China, I want to talk about confidence, because when you think about where you came and where you went and how you had to become comfortable going into places that would have ordinarily made anybody very uncomfortable. I want to know how you learned to do that, to be authentic, and then to get beyond that whole imposter syndrome thing that I can't believe we are still talking about so many years after women went to work. So, you are all there. You are a force of nature. How did you get to that point and being able to do that? And then how do you mentor others who may not have had the strong parental guidance in that so that you could do it?
Well, it really does start with two fundamental beliefs. One is we do all put our pants on one leg at a time. Like whoever you are, whatever you have, like that. My father was a bit more colorful, and I'll save that for maybe an after 5 conversation. But at its core, that's the core message, right? There are certain things that simply make us all equal, right? Now, whether you accept your equality is a different issue, and that comes with practice. And that is the beauty of you go talk to, you go handle. They would step in if it were, necessary, but they let us go as far as we could on our own to figure it out, to work it out, to resolve our issue. What's interesting is, as I coach people, as I work with people that I sponsor, what I always tell them is it's practice. Like you have to have muscle memory of the comfort. And pre-pandemic, many of us, depending on your particular field, you have a petri dish of opportunity around you all day long, every day. And it doesn't matter how big or small it is. It only matters that you take advantage of it. So for people who spend a lot of time traveling, for instance, what I would say to them is, so the person next to you, you decide today that you're going to have a 3-minute conversation. You decide today that my goal is in the conversation, I'm going to stop it first, or I'm going to start it first, right? Depending on what your particular issue is, there are lots of opportunities, right, to practice all the time. So that then when you're in the situation, when you're in the circumstance, it doesn't feel as foreign. Because here's what happens when it feels foreign. Your body responds. Your heart rate goes up, your stomach might twist, you might get a little warm, and you can't think clearly when all that physical stuff is happening. So you have to put yourself in enough of the circumstance so that the physical part isn't distracting anymore. It may still happen, but you're comfortable with it. You know what it is, and you can actually ignore it and set it aside so that you can show up, think about what's happening in the room at the time, respond in a way that makes sense based on, the chair you're occupying in that room. And you can ignore sort of the other stuff that's so distracting. I mean, and depending on where a person is, a lot of times you're thinking about, well, how do I say it? And what does it mean? And do I say it now? And by that time, you've missed the moment, right? The conversation's moved on. But part of it's because we get in our own heads. And what I tell people is if you can practice enough, even in small ways, you will get out of your head and into the room. And then you're just going to be who you are, right? I had to learn that was going to be okay. And I had to also learn that there were going to be awkward circumstances no matter what. And that's that second college experience I referred to earlier. I had a professor who asked me, I was in a, senior level philosophy class. It's a small group of people because not many people like minor in philosophy. And he said, so I'm curious, what do you think will be more challenging as you go into the world of work? Being Black or being female? Now, in that moment, I got to tell you, I was, I think I was a junior, maybe, or it might have been my senior year. I didn't know what to do with that. And all those physical things I just talked about all happened. I felt like everybody in the room was looking at me, that everybody was waiting for me to say something. My heart rate went up. It got a little warm. And the whole time I'm trying to think about, now, how do I not offend everybody in this room? Because I feel like no matter how I answer this question, it's a catch-22, and I'm either going to offend somebody or I'm going to get dismissed. And so in that moment, at that point in my life, I opted to take what I thought, quite frankly, was the easier path. And I said, being a woman. I'm not sure that's what I really thought in the moment, but I thought it was the easiest answer to accept in that environment. And so there were only 2 women in the class. I was literally the only person of color, and everybody else was a white male. And I thought, this is just going to be easier to answer this way. Problem is, I walked out of that class and I didn't feel good about my answer. And I carried that with me for the next, several days. Like, it just didn't sit right. And I couldn't put my finger on why, except that what I knew was I didn't say what I really thought, and it was bugging me. Because what I really thought was, how the hell am I supposed to choose between those 2 things? As if I get to put one of them on a shelf every day. Like, I'm just going to be Black today, but not female. Oh, I'm going to be a female today, but not. Like, I can't parse them. And so it was in hindsight a ridiculous question. And what I realized is I don't need to, have to, or nor am I required to give people who ask me ridiculous questions answers that make them comfortable. That I really have to answer that in a way that's going to make me comfortable. I can't control what you ask me, but I can control how I answer, and I can control how I feel about it afterwards. So from that day till this, when people ask questions that, for me personally, whether they're personal questions or actually even in a place where people are challenging my ideas in the workplace, right? In a way that we've all been there, where you're like, what are we challenging here exactly? Because this doesn't feel like it's about the content. This feels like it's about something else, right? How do you respond to that? And from that day till this, I sort of promised myself I would not in the future bite my tongue that way. Now, that doesn't mean I'm rude, nasty, brutish, it's not that, but it is about being clear and direct in a way that I can leave being good with what I said, regardless of its outcome. And that was that lesson, which has allowed me to show up the way that I show up.
How does someone like you, so fierce, so sure, function showing up authentically when you work for such a big machine. You work for a corporate machine with expectations. I can't imagine what happened the day you showed up. They'd be like, oh.
Well, so I think off-cycle messaging is wildly important, and I don't think people do it enough. And I especially don't think women do it enough. And I especially don't think people of color do it enough, because we're always so anchored in that moment, answering that question that's in front of us, that we forget there's brand building that happens with every single interaction we have. How you want people to treat you, how you want people to see you is a function of what you tell them, not when they're actively engaging on a particular topic, but how you engage them when you're not having a particular conversation, when you're not having a conversation where people are anchored in their own position. So let me give you an example of what I mean. When I was interviewing, and this is now 15 years ago, I said to the person I was having a conversation with, listen, look, because at that point I was early 40s. And I said, so here's the thing. I don't know if there's a place in your organization for a person like me. And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm a motorcycle riding, tattoo having, lesbian mother of two who bakes. I don't know.
Repeat that so everybody gets every syllable of that. Do it again a little louder.
What I said to them was, I said, listen, I'm a motorcycle riding, tattoo having, lesbian mother of two who bakes. All of her is going to show up. And what I need to know is there a place for someone who's going to bring all the attribute that I just described to your organization? Because that's who's going to show up on some Monday morning. And if it's not, okay, let's enjoy the steak and move on. I'm good with that. But if there's a place for it, then let's keep having this conversation. And the fascinating response was to me at the time, because lots of people said to me, as I had said to them, I was having conversations with this particular entity, had said, really? Oh, I don't know. So the lesson in this is lots of times people's perception of an entity, and therefore what we then internalize about that entity, instead of asking the question, we then make a bunch of decisions based on what everybody else has told us they think about that entity, instead of us asking the question head on. So when I was in this process, people were saying, oh, really? Because that's an old boy world. And really, you think? And I said, listen, I don't know from Adam, so I'm going to go ask, right? So the response was, yeah, absolutely, because that means you have an opinion. And that is what matters here, that you have a point of view, that you can show up and have a point of view, because that's what we offer, right? And so what was fascinating is I said, all right, great. And fast forward, I took the role. I honestly didn't think I'd stay that long. It's been 15 years. It's been an amazing and awesome run. And the reason is because that one statement about you have to have a point of view, that's what we value, has served well. It has always meant that I've had the latitude, the opportunity to, in fact, offer my point of view. Doesn't mean everybody agrees. My wife bought me a t-shirt that says, I'm not for everybody. So I get that. But I've always had the opportunity to say what I believe needed to be said in whatever room I was in. And there have been instances where it's changed the direction in the conversation, and instances where we simply disagreed. And it's all been okay, because at the end of the day, the outcome is going to be the outcome. And if you have a diverse enough team, you should have a lot of rich discussion to get to the bottom line. The question in art is, will somebody hear you when you say what you say? Will you be singing and will you be heard? And if those two things are true, the rest of it is honestly just unfolds in amazing ways.
I think you were exploring that, right? With your question, you were exploring, is there someone at this company that's going to hear me when I do these things? And so you have a right to interview and ask those types of questions. Yes. I wanted to take a minute to understand, in the environment where you work, it's demanding and things are changing around. How do we take care of ourselves, find harmony between our work and our life? And you've talked a lot about being able to bring your full self So how do you manage the demands of work while protecting who you are and what your needs are on a more personal level?
So first is you got to be honest with who you are. I am the equivalent of an alcoholic who works in a bar. And I have been in every single career. Like it has nothing to do with this place or this time. It is literally who I am. I'm an all in kind of girl. And because that is who I am as a human, I tend to gravitate toward places that want more, require more, need more of you, because that fits. And so first point of order is know who you really are and what really works for you. I've said to many people, I literally don't work different hours today than I did when I was practicing law or working in government or today. I've always worked the same way. There's a couple of hours in the middle of a day where I go, I'm not doing that because I'm doing this other thing. When the kids were small, it was them. When the kids weren't small, it became my brain just doesn't work between like 5 and 7. So I'm just not going to do anything then. So you got to know who you are because wherever you go, your habits, for good, bad, or otherwise, are all going to show up with you. Right. And so knowing who you are and then communicating to people what you need in order to do your best work. Right. And so I'm a night person. I've always been a night person. I was born and raised a night person. And so consequently, I do a lot of work after midnight, always have. Right. So I say to people, right, here's the deal. Like, if I have to think hard between 5 and 7, like, I'm like, hey, that's when my brain takes its own rest break, right, to recharge for what's going to happen between 10 and 2. You got to know that about you and then integrate it in a way that works. One of the first things I do with my teams is I ask people, when do you work best? When are you firing on all cylinders? And one of the first things I used to do was then make a time calendar of the team's optimal hours of work. So that when we had to go through reviews for deliverables or produce really important documents that multiple people were going to touch, the idea was to move them along everybody's best hours of work where we could. Why? Because you work a lot less harder when you're fully on. And you work a lot harder when you're not trying to wedge it into a time that's your own mental downtime. And so that way I got the best of everybody over a 24-hour period, which means we get a better product sooner, faster, because everybody's working at their moment of their best. For some people, that's 5 a.m. For some people, that's 2 a.m. The art is if you can balance that and give people that latitude to work when they work best. Now, we all have to work all day. Like, we all get it. But when I need you to do something that's truly intense, or has a relative level of importance that's even higher, right, for whatever reason, optimizing when people are at their best makes everybody's life easier. You have to know that about you, though. You have to sit back and say, when do I do what I do best? And then arrange your schedule to manage your energy, not your time.
Well,
right?
So China, when you talk about that, I'm thinking about just real life examples of the leaders who have been very clear, like you did. You set expectations, you're asking these questions, but every time you send me that 2 a.m. email, I, as the person on your team, am having an anxiety attack of, okay, wait a minute, how long is she waiting for me to follow back up? So how do you manage the fear and uncertainty with your team so that you aren't saying one thing, but creating a culture where the demands are confusing or can cause a lot of stress on the folks?
Yeah. And it is literally being very clear and straightforward. So, and I think even now people are starting to put, like, at the bottom of their emails, this may not reach you at a time that you work optimally. This is mine. Don't feel compelled to respond. Well, before that was a tagline. I would literally say to people, listen, you're going to get the email from me between midnight and 2:30 in the morning, because that's when I do email. I am not expecting you to respond. And usually you will find in that email a notion of when I do need you to respond. Like, I'm going to need that back by 9 or whatever the case may be. I even sometimes will say, literally, you should be sleeping. This is so you will have it when you wake up, right? Because that's what I want. And so, to your point, it is not just saying the words, but following up with the actual behaviors in a way that people actually can internalize that, no, she really doesn't expect an answer at 2:45. And so it's become a running joke, where, with all my colleagues around the fact that it's like, two things are true. One is I send a lot of emails at 2 a.m. and you can always tell when I'm actually finally now getting tired, because then I'm a bad typist. And they're like, yeah, that was about 3:15. And that was one of your deciphering emails. But, and part of it's also about being human, right? And people recognizing it's not about perfection, right? It's really about getting to the right level of good. And so it is about what you say. So I say to people many times, here's when I need it, right? Here's the outcome and the time that I need it. And if somebody doesn't tell you that, then ask them, right? Because I tell people, look, I don't care if you work at 2 a.m. or 2 p.m. That's not my issue. My issue is we need this product on this day by this date and time for whatever purpose it is. That's what I need you to meet. I'm going to let you manage you in the process. If you miss those milestones, that's a different conversation. But that's a different conversation predicated on actual behavior, not on some arbitrary set of rules about how I need to manage the world. And so active follow-up, consistent with the verbal message, is incredibly important.
One of the times that we were together, I was moderating a panel, and in the audience were MBA candidates that the unnamed consulting company was trying to recruit. And I just blurted out, so how many hours do you actually work? And you told the truth. And they had wished that I had not asked that question, because as I recall, you were over 80 hours a week at that point.
There are times when that's just true, right? But again, know who you are. And as I said to them then, this is about who I am. When I worked in government, my hours were literally not different. When I moved into this company in this role, one of the first things people said is, you work a lot. And I go, yes, I've always worked a lot, because that's who I am, right? It doesn't mean it's required. And it's about how you work. It's about how you choose to work. My wife will surf the internet in the evening for a couple hours. It's just, I don't know. It's like roaming around. And to me, I have zero patience or interest in roaming the internet for no purpose. I would rather do my email. I would rather finish a document. I would rather do something, right? That's her thing. She does it all the time, right? That's cool. Not for me. I can't just surf. I can't just.
Right. But the bigger question is, how do you maintain that level of intensity, productivity, and have a successful relationship and be a parent? And I do know that you've had to make sacrifices as a parent, and I want you to talk about that, because you've been very upfront about that.
Oh, yeah. Listen, the deal in our house is we're all doing this. So we got to all be in or we're all out. I'm okay with our choice, but we have to collectively make the choice, because I'm not doing mommy guilt. So, and the way to avoid mommy guilt is to have a discussion. Now, obviously, you can't have a discussion if they're 3, but as my kids were aging, right, as they were 8 and 12, and then 12 and 16, and we had to make milestone decisions about the career choice, it was a collective conversation and a collective benefit. So I did 3 things over the life of my career that I have found helpful. The first of which is, it's more about consistency than quantity. So remember, I'm one of 8, we ran our own business. My parents never showed up to anything ever, because if they weren't working, we weren't actually earning money to feed ourselves. So you go play basketball. The deal was, I'll come to 1 game a year, right? I'll come to 1 concert a year. When you start having 8 kids like that, it becomes a lot anyway. And so the reality is, I'm like, oh, because I counted for 1. I looked forward to that 1 game where I knew that they were going to show up, the 1 play that they were going to show up. It was up to me to tell them which game, which play, and then they showed up for that thing. I've patterned that, right, in my ring of my own kids. I only had 2, so I could give them more opportunities than 1. But the deal was, you tell me, and they were, sports kids and debate kids and, all this stuff that happens at Tuesday at 5:30 in the afternoon. Like, who does that, right? But that's what schools do. And so I said to them, listen, here's the deal. There are 4 things. 1, you get 4 dates. You need to tell me what 4 things you want me to attend this semester, and I will be there. come hell or high water, I will be there. And I will always be home for you to wake up to on your birthday. Period, full stop. That off-cycle messaging thing I was talking about earlier, all of my clients, many of my colleagues all know at the time I had this 4-event rule. And they knew it because I talked about it generally in due conversation, where I'd say, somebody say, how do you do this? How do you travel so much? I'm like, well, it's easy because my kids each get 4 things. They get four events, 4 days that it means I won't travel and I will be there to, be in the audience for that thing. When we weren't scheduling a meeting, when we weren't talking about, on-site time, when we weren't talking about, it was just conversation. And what would happen is over time, people, when those days will eventually roll around and somebody'd say, oh, can you do a meeting on? And I go, that's one of my 4. And they go, oh, no, we'll pick a different day. I didn't even have to ask for an accommodation because people understood the philosophy. That off-cycle communication, that off-cycle messaging, so people understand how you made priorities in your life, what they look like. I'm not handing over my personal calendar, but I'm giving them some nuggets that will help them understand my approach to availability, my approach to, being available for my family, being available for them. And with that knowledge, people will actually adjust, generally speaking. Now, like anything, there are times when you go, oh my God, this thing is about to happen and that thing's going to happen. And they are running headlong into each other. At that point, it's all about the earlier you realize it and the earlier you have a conversation about it, the more likely you are to get to a solution that's livable. Sometimes, and this is what I said to my children, and some of you might find this challenging as a philosophy, but I literally said to my kids by the time they were in middle school, I said, listen, there are going to be days where literally nothing on the planet will be more important to me than you and what you need in that moment. And you will have everything you need from me on those days, bar none. There are also going to be days where I'm not going to care about Susie being mad at you, about who's not talking to you, about which homework thing, about what which teacher said. I am not. And that is also a true statement. And on those days, you will work it out for yourself, because the truth is there are things you're going to need to learn to work out for yourself. Both of these things will exist. What we will decide together is whether the issue is important enough that I need to solve it or you need to solve it. And that's what I did. And so literally my kids would come in with oh my God, I got it. And I go, okay, is this a mommy problem to solve or is this a you problem to solve? And they go, oh, yeah, I don't need you to solve it. Oh, okay. All right.
Well, that's really mature.
And then they move on. And sometimes they go, no, you have to do this. And if that's what they told me, then great. But at the same time, they were learning to judge the level of complexity and importance in the decisions they were making every day. So everything wasn't an unmitigated disaster that had to be fixed right now. And so it helped them start to parse, how important is this really? Is it important enough? And if it is, then that's what we're going to do. But if it isn't, you're going to do it and let me know how it worked out. And that's what we did. And the backside of that was, because it was a joint decision about, are we going to go after this next promotion? Are we going to take this next thing? Are we going to do what it takes for us to achieve that? And if the answer was yes, and we did, and we were successful, then they got a bonus at the end. That if it's a good year for me, because we all, bellied up to the same bar and did what we needed to do, then it's a good year for you. And they would get things that represented their extraordinary input in this extraordinary achievement. And that way they also understood they were making an investment and they were going to reap some benefit on the other side of it. They didn't always like it, to be clear. Let me say, they didn't always like it. But they at least understood it and they could process it. Would I tell you they'd say, oh, gee, it would have been nicer for you to not travel so much? Sure, I'm certain it would be. I didn't look like every other mom, right? But at the same time, they would also say, because they're now 24 and 27, that they are much more comfortable making good decisions for themselves today than they think some of their friends are.
Did they have resentment when they see their their friends having their moms there everywhere? Or was your wife able to be more present?
She was able to be more present. I mean, the reality is I was never going to be the mom that showed up to read story hour. Like it didn't matter. And so in those years, I was actually working in government, literally 10 minutes from my house. I wasn't a storytime mom then either, right? I've never been that person. Again, it's about knowing who you are. I tell the teacher, tell me you want some cookies, I'll bake them in the middle of the night. Tell me you need a project done, I got no problem with it. I'm not coming to read. I'm not going on field trips. I'm not that human, right? And so my contribution is based on my wheelhouse, right? You need somebody to build some spreadsheets for you. You need somebody to fine, give me tasks that I can do on my own time. Don't ask me to do things that mean I need to be at school at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, because I'm not her, right? And so they did have the ability to, my wife would be able to show up. Like I had a rule. You don't give me the permission slip, then I don't know what to tell you. I guess you're not going. I'm not running out at I'm not doing it, because if you fail once, that usually solves the problem. If they miss it once, then they usually don't ever miss it again.
Right.
And so I'm like, there are natural consequences. That's all I got. And so teachers would say, we even at one point I was like, listen, I would show up and go, yeah, I'm the phantom parent. I'm the other one that you never see. And they'd be like, oh, you're the one who's always on planes. I go, I am. Right. But I was the project parent. So I didn't ask about homework every day, not my shtick, but all projects were my purview, because projects had a lead time. You had to structure them. Right. So how we did division of labor in our house is she did the day-to-day, because I'm not that human. And I did the project work, right? Melty, snowy ice, right? Like I did the science projects. I did the big writing projects. Like that was where I leaned in. So they got an adequate mix of both. They just got me doing the stuff I'm actually good at instead of the stuff I'm not.
That's
wow.
A lot of wisdom.
Yes, this has been incredible. Like I can sit here and listen to you.
I told you. Didn't I tell you she was going to blow you away?
I know. And you were exceeded expectations. It was interesting as I was, just to kind of wrap us up, there was this theme that I felt like I noticed through your entire story about you were taught early on, and it has followed you, to make conscious decisions. Your family taught you to make conscious decisions. Your mentors, your champions have taught you to do that. It is so ingrained in who you are. And it sort of took me to this place where I'm like, what does that all mean? What it meant was, the advice is this: you know who you are, right? For us, we need to know who we are. We need to then know what we value and want. We then need to honor that, and we honor that by asking for it as well as communicating it. And through that, then understanding of ourselves and that conscious decision about who we are and how we live, it gives us space then to honor others. And I think that's why, as a leader, I'm hearing you able to create an environment where people thrive based on their values, who they are, whether it's your family and you're teaching them, or the kids, or your coworkers and colleagues. And that just sort of wraps up to a very powerful message to me. But I loved a couple of quotes where you talked about, be open, available, and listen. The work you desire will guide you. And I think my favorite, I have so many, but I'm going to just give one more. Just because you're born here doesn't mean you have to choose here. And I just want to drop the mic on that one, because I think this is a crutch that many women particularly lean on, that we need to just let it go and become who we want to be. And we do that through those steps and tactics that you shared. This was beautiful, a beautiful moment.
Yeah, China, thank you so much for being with us. You always hit a homer. So I'll just have to continue to nag you. Write your book.
I'm buying it.
I'm getting closer.
You said that the last time.
No, but you gave me some instruction. And so I now have chapter headings, and I have stories associated to them. So it's a slow process for sure, but I'm getting closer.
Well,
So
thank you so much for being here. We will be your first interview when it comes out. So thank you so much, China.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and giving me an opportunity to share, and hopefully, valuable nuggets for folks to take away and, hopefully help move forward in their own career choices.
Thank you for joining the Hard Won Wisdom podcast with best-selling author Von Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Join us weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network. Visit hardwonwisdom.com for more on this podcast and for links to Fawn and Michelle's web pages and social media. Also, be sure to rate, subscribe, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort, and we'll see you next week.